Most people know that I'm an active duty veteran and a current Air Force reservist, but not as many people know that I'm a 20-year military spouse. And I spent 5 years as a stay-at-home mom, homeschooling my children for 3 of those years. In 2008, I was at the top of my military career, a combat-tested fighter pilot. I had just pinned on major, and I was training the next generation of F-16 fighter pilots when I stepped away from that leadership role to be at home. I had a 2-year-old and a newborn, and as I was closing the door on my military career, we were also packing up our bags to move to Iquique, a small town in Chile, South America, where my husband had received a foreign exchange assignment with the Chilean Air Force. Now, one of my first memories of our arrival in Iquique was our first grocery trip. I was exhausted from travel and looking forward to picking up just a few creature comforts at the store. But when we got there, everything was written in Spanish and the brands were unfamiliar, so it was difficult to find even the most basic staples. The more I looked for familiar items, the more I felt upset. And then we went in search of milk. I scoured the cold section of the store looking for milk, and it was nowhere to be found. So then I started to feel even more upset. Well, we did eventually find the milk, and it wasn't in the cold section of the store. In fact, it wasn't even chilled, but it was warm milk stored on a shelf. At that point, I lost it. I broke down in tears right there in front of the milk section. And I wasn't just crying over the milk. I was also crying over the loss of my home country and over the loss of a sense of purpose and identity. Because you see, when I left my military career to be at home, what I didn't realize is how much of my identity was wrapped up in that leadership role. But what I also didn't realize is that I was now being called to lead in a different way with a different set of people, namely my children. And this happens to so many of us as leaders. We don't step up to the call to lead, we burn out and we step away from leadership, or we fail to fully grow as leaders because we don't experience joy in the journey. And that's because joy motivates us to persevere through the most difficult of leadership challenges. So, how do we begin to harness that level of contentment that fuels our passion so that we do find joy in the journey? Well, that's what I'm going to answer for you today. Because you see, the journey of joy and the journey toward joy is like building a stable home with a firm foundation, strong structural walls, and a protective covering. And in your leadership journey, that firm foundation for joy is acceptance and embracing the situation you find yourself in. For example, when I was in Chile and my circumstances didn't meet with my expectations, I rejected the situation and I decided I was not going to participate in that culture. And then I was invited to a Chilean spouses event. Well, I couldn't imagine being able to communicate effectively and be able to understand and be understood, so I was determined that I wouldn't go to that event. My husband, on the other hand, wanting me to make friends, was just as determined that I would go. In fact, in our 20 years of marriage, that is the only time I can remember him putting his foot down and insisting that I do something that I didn't want to do. So I finally agreed to go. When I got home that evening, I was embarrassed to admit to him that I had had a great time. And that then opened me up to embrace the situation I was in instead of pining for the situation I had hoped for. You see, to embrace our situation, we have to let go of the fear that holds us back. Because fear shuts down that part of our brain that reasons. And if we're not reasoning, we're simply responding to our emotions and we can't get to productive solutions. But when we respond with reason, we are able to push through our fear toward future growth. We also have to be able to cultivate deep personal relationships with others. So often when we are hurting or struggling, we tend to look at people as objects who are there for our purposes, instead of seeing them as individuals whom we can help. When I was in Chile and I didn't understand the circumstances that surrounded me, I started to look at people as though they were barriers to my happiness. But when I went to that spouses event, I saw that those women were just like me. And that opened me up to embracing my situation and developing deep and abiding friendships. This taught me a very important leadership lesson. Leadership is not about persuading others to get on board with your initiatives and your advancement. Instead, true leadership is about motivating and empowering others toward their full potential. Because when we share in their success, it results in our joy. And that then lays the foundation for joy in our leadership journey. Now, after we've laid that foundation, it is time to put the structural walls in place that support our joy by cultivating our faith. Now, faith is a taboo subject, and we do not like to talk about it. But the fact is that we are all spiritual beings. And so no matter what your faith journey looks like, spiritual connection is an important part of who you are. When I was in Chile and still in the midst of a very deep depression, I had a significant spiritual experience, so much so that I wrote home to my friends and family about it. And today I want to share with you just a little bit about what I wrote. Family and friends, I just wanted to let everyone know that we're doing much better. In the midst of some difficult circumstances, I've recaptured my joy. How? Well, I was driving down the road a couple of days ago with the windows down, and for the first time since I got here, the sky was blue, the sun was shining, and it was a beautiful day driving along the coast. I was singing at the top of my lungs to a praise song, and it occurred to me, sometimes it is so easy to find joy when everything is the way I want it to be. When I have all my closest friends and family around me and I can worship the way I want, with the people I want. When I live in the land that I want, in the house that I want, and when I can go to the grocery store and buy what I want when I want it. In fact, it's easier when I'm living the life that I want to live. But after listening to the words of that praise song, I realized I only have this one life to live. And I can either wallow in the pit of self-pity, or I can choose to praise God with everything I have from my inner being. What happened in my situation? Did my circumstances change? No. Did the people that surround me change? No. None of those things changed. But what did change was my outlook. And that's what cultivating your faith does. When you're going through those difficult times, you have to know what you value, because what you value becomes your core. That structure that holds you up and gives you purpose. So often as leaders, when we go through difficult times, we get discouraged, and that's because we lose our perspective. But faith is the great perspective changer. And research supports this. In the Netherlands, a 2015 survey by the London School of Economics and Erasmus University Medical Center found that participation in faith organizations was the only social activity associated with sustained happiness. In fact, participation in faith organizations was more effective at producing happiness than volunteering for a favorite charity, taking educational classes, and even participation in political and community groups. And that's because when you cultivate your faith, you begin to understand who you are and what purpose you're serving. And that helps you shift your perspective to bounce back from difficulties. As leaders, we must take into consideration the role that faith plays in our own journey of joy and how that affects those who work for us and around us. Because whenever we cultivate our faith, it allows us to help others get through difficult times with hope. So we lay that firm foundation by embracing our situation, and then we put the structural walls in place by cultivating our faith. But there's one final touch that's needed, and that's the protective covering or roof. The roof provides shelter from the storm, and it keeps out destructive elements. And in the same way, Your house of joy is enclosed and sustained by growing in resilience. So many people think that resilience is fixed. But in fact, resilience is something that we can increase and grow in the same way that we grow physically stronger. If you've ever gone to the gym and you've lifted weights, you know that you have to lift more weights and you have to do more repetitions in order to get stronger. And we know that that tearing down of the muscle is absolutely necessary in the growth process. The same is true in life. We must go through difficult times of suffering in order to train our minds and our souls toward an overcoming mentality. And we do this in the same way that an athlete goes through a physical training effort in order to meet a difficult challenge. Research supports this as well. In 2020, Marcus Buckingham of the ADP Research Institute conducted a global resilience study. And he looked at 25,000 working adults in 25 countries. And what he was measuring was people's level of resilience against their level of exposure to coronavirus traumas. And what he found was that as people encountered more trauma and as they encountered more disruptive changes to their schedule, their resilience grew. This is life-changing for us because our tendency is to shy away from pain and suffering. But if we're going to grow in resilience, we actually have to lean into and embrace suffering as the key to our growth. And in fact, we can increase our growth and resilience. I've done this through fitness efforts. I've completed 2 full Ironman triathlons, and this can require a grueling schedule and difficult pain of sometimes up to 15 hours of training a week. Now, people have told me that I'm crazy for participating in this activity, and people have asked me, why do you do it? Well, the answer is because I find joy in the effort. And the reason I find joy in the effort is because overcoming difficult situations is the stimulus for joy. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, I don't want to do that type of intense physical exercise. That is not for me, and that's okay. But you must find hard efforts that push you outside of your comfort zone so that you can train your mind toward an overcoming mentality. Because it is in the process of going through those hard efforts that you experience joy. And that joy that you experience allows you to step up and lead others along that same path toward joy and overcoming. In my 20 years of leadership, I've served in multiple leadership roles. But by far, one of the hardest roles that I served in was stepping out of the workplace to lead in my home. And in that process, I lost my joy. But what enabled me to bounce back was embracing my situation, cultivating my faith, and growing in resilience. And in building that house of joy, I was able to find the strength and the hope to step up and lead. And you have it within yourselves to do the same. 2020, it's been a difficult year. And many of you are in the midst of your own leadership crisis. Some of you are contemplating whether to step up and lead. Others of you, you're burned out and you're thinking of stepping away from leadership. And still others of you, you've already stepped away and now you're trying to find yourself. You're trying to define a new purpose. Wherever you may be in your leadership journey, my challenge to you is to fight for joy in that journey. In the grind of life, in the difficulties of your life and your experiences, push to overcome. Because as you experience the joy of overcoming, it will strengthen your resolve to lead and inspire others to step up to the call. Thank you.